bright light. Okay, hello everybody, and good morning. Welcome here to this year's event of the presentation of Microsoft Windows. No. Okay, so welcome everyone. For those who haven't met me before, my name is Jogbäck. I'm the CEO of Netnod, and I want to welcome you, everybody here, to these 2 days of the Netnod Spring Meeting. Unfortunately, I don't know in which order we have done these things, but we have been doing it for quite some time, and we're just going to continue with that in the future. First of all, I would like to extend my thank you to all of you for coming here. I want to extend my thank you for the team at Netnod that has put this together. I want to extend my thank you to Rob Allen, who will be our moderator for today, and keeping everybody on time and knowing when we should present and everything. We have a record today. We are 198 people, if I'm not totally misinformed, registered. And as far as I can see here, it's quite full. People are even overflowing down to the cozy sofas over there as well. So it's going to be really nice to have you all here. We have a good program for today. You will hear some great speakers. You will hear some information from Netnod on something new. And you will also hear from other people. And this year we also, tomorrow we offer a DNS course. And if you haven't registered for that course, please contact one of the Netnod staff and we will help you with that. So, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. And a big thank you goes from me and the whole Netnod team to Adva, Conapto, with Interaction as a supporting sponsors. And this is the reason we are here. We really need and appreciate your help. Thank you very much for that. A little thing that I want to highlight also is that we have a couple of new faces in Netnod since the last meeting. We hired 4 great new people to extend our staff, and those are Emil Palm, who is one of our network engineers, is taking care of our networks and make sure they work all over the time, 24/7. We have Kristian Lindholm, who is the product manager for all our products, ranging from the IX to DNS to time and frequency services. We have Peter Eriksson, who joined quite recently as a site reliability engineer and make sure our systems are on track and performs good and works. And last but not least, Ulf Hedlund, who joined us as senior software engineer and make sure to extend and build new great software that we need to run our services. Please give them an applause of welcome to Netnod. So, we are still running rock-solid internet services. We will continue to do this. Today, we will have a presentation of some upgrades and new products coming up afterwards here that I will hand over to my colleagues, Kristian and Emil, to talk about that. Welcome up. And also later, you will hear from Matthias and Liman, who talked a little bit about the security challenge we had at the beginning of this year, and we want to give you the transparent information on what happened after the coffee break. Enjoy the day, enjoy networking with each other, have some great conversations, and I hope to see all of you at the social venue tonight, which will be at Pokeburger, as you've seen on the slides scrolling here. The buses will leave from the venue here directly after the program. And therefore, I hand over to Kristian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to inform you about some products updates we've been doing. I think we have, as an IX, we have to do something more now, so you don't just go over to PNIs instead of using us. So we'll show you some slides, which I hope you will find interesting, and the first step in the right way. So first of all, if you're present in Stockholm and Copenhagen, you will get Sundsvall, Luleå, and Gothenburg for free. So if you have a 10G connection in Stockholm and Copenhagen, you will get 1G at Sundsvall, Luleå, and Gothenburg. And if you have 100G connection, you will get 10 Gs in Sundsvall, Luleå, and Gothenburg. And together with the next slide, I hope that will make a difference. We have a lot of customers in Stockholm, not that much customers in Gothenburg or Sundsvall and Luleå. And if you're in a local IX, you don't have so many operators to pair with and not that many CDNs. So we'll offer IX VLAN, so you can connect from Gothenburg to or whatever site to Stockholm, for example. So if you have a 10G connection in Gothenburg, you can have a 10G IX VLAN to Stockholm for 2,500 Swedish crowns per month. And if you're at Stockholm and want to go to Gothenburg, Sundsvall, and Luleå, you can do that as well for 2,500 and then get all of them for the same price. And since we have a good cooperation with Nix in Oslo, we also wanted to give you the possibility to go there and for Nix customers to go to Stockholm. So that's also possible with a bit of a different pricing model, but I think it will work out. And this will be operational after the summer. As a customer request, we also added the subrates of 100G. So if you want 20 or 50, you can have it at the 100G port and make incremental steps. So it will help you with less manual labor for updates and downgrades and upgrades, as well as you don't have to have as many cross-connects. We have had a product called Optical IX, which maybe was a bit confusing, but we renamed it to Metro Access, and it's if you're present at a data center in Stockholm, you can go to another data center, and we have 10 and 100G connections between most data centers within the Stockholm region. Now we also have it in Copenhagen and Malmö, and soon to be between some sites in Oslo. And a quite good priced, so please use it. We also have, if you want to go from region to region, if you want to go from Copenhagen to Luleå or Oslo to Stockholm, we also have the VDM transport between the sites. So you can do that, and there's redundant options possible. And for Luleå, if you connect to Luleå during this year, you will get one year for free. And since the IX is a bit outside Luleå, IT Norrbotten has agreed to help us and sponsor us with one 10G connection for free from Rådstugegatan out to the IX. If you have more questions about this, please find any one of our colleagues later. And now I'll hand over to my colleague Emil.
Hello. So basically I have a more technical update on not product and more on technical stuff. So we have been doing SARINer the past year, and we have handed in the report to PTS about our findings, where they actually found that we have some things we have to work on within the Swedish infrastructure to make it more redundant and less prone to errors and attacks from outside. The report is available from PTS, and you should download it and look at it. And during 2019, we will continue with the proof of concept of developing the infrastructure. We have also been doing internet access, which is a project where we define what a service delivery is with the cooperation of a lot of other ISPs, and the Internet Stiftelsen has been the driving force behind it. There we have submitted our first report, and we will now work with phase 2, which is a implementation or delivery of a measurement tool of how we should measure an internet access. We're also going to update our route servers this year, It's been a long time coming. So basically, we're going to switch out from GoBGP, or from Bird only, to do a dual vendor setup with Bird and GoBGP. For those who don't know, GoBGP is a BGP daemon that's built in Go, built by JPNAP in Japan. That is very good for and suitable for route servers. They have built-in RPKI, RTR support, and so on. We are going to start with Copenhagen within the next couple of coming weeks with a friendly use test. So if you're interested, just email me, Emil@Netnod, and we'll set something up. And you have to be present at the IX, of course. Stockholm, within a couple of months, because we're going to try out migrating Copenhagen first, and then do Stockholm, since that's a bigger IX for us. We are going to have RPKI built into this from the get-go, so it's going to be dropping invalids, and we will tag every received route with either invalid, unknown, or accepted, with a specific BGP community that you can use in your end to filter out routes that you find that you don't want to have. So if you don't want to have unknowns over the route service, you can just filter them out. And we're also actually deploying a looking glass based on Alice Looking Glass, which is it was built by DECIX and ASICS for just route servers. So it's purposely built for route server information. We have been building the GoBGP integration into it, and it's looking pretty good. And that's the last slide. So any questions, find me afterwards, or any of my colleagues. And for that, I will hand over to Rob.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Allen. I'm the moderator of the Netnod meeting today. It will be my privilege to try and get us through to the coffee breaks, lunch, and of course the social in good time and good order. And so for that, just a quick announcement for the speakers. If you are speaking in this slot today, could you please go to the back of the room before your slot, and our wonderful sound tech, Mika, will get you one of these fantastic radio mics set up. There. So I think we're just going to crack straight into the next presentation. That will be Kent Lidström. Kent, are you already mic'd up? There we are, perfect. Kent is the Director of Products at Smart Optics, where he leads the optical network product unit. He's held various positions at Transmode and Infinera, and he has recently returned to Sweden from a 4-year assignment as the Director of Sales Engineering in the States. He has over 15 years of experience from the optical networking industry. So please join me in welcoming Kent to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kent Lidström. I work at Smart Optics, as I was just introduced. So before I start my presentation, I will actually tell you a quick story here. So earlier in the week, I've been down in Toulouse in France, joining a conference there. When we got down to the hotel Sunday afternoon, it was kind of chaotic in the reception area, because the players from Paris Saint-Germain was there, and they'd stayed at the hotel, and they were just about to leave for their Sunday evening game against Toulouse. So it was crowded. It was a lot of fans over there taking photos. And the first thing that happened to me there was, of course, that my cell phone got stolen. And when that happened, I realized it's been a struggle for the last 3 days, and I realized how incredibly dependent I am on having an iPhone and having access to data all the time. And this is definitely something, I've been reflecting over, that I've changed my behavior over the last maybe 15, 20 years, and have an expectation nowadays to be able to get that information all the time. And all those small things become complicated if you don't have it. For example, just doing the navigation in the car. Nowadays, I would use my iPhone for that. That became, of course, an issue. I couldn't find my way. Just boarding the plane. I, of course, have a mobile boarding pass, and that wasn't working either. Download a film to get some entertainment on the plane home was, of course, not possible either. And I think that I know that I'm not the only one that have changed my mentality around this and expect to have access to data all the time and so on. I would think that all the consumers in this room and in general, they today expect to have, a constant upgrade of increased bandwidth, more cell data, better coverage, more Wi-Fi access points, and so on. And all of this is, of course, going to drive bandwidth in the networks. However, most of the customers and consumers today, they do not expect to pay more for increased bandwidth and so on. They expect to pay the same. This is, of course, going to be a challenge for the operators and service providers and the internet exchanges for that matter, because they need to find innovative way to deliver more bandwidth without increasing the price. So the topic that I'm going to talk about here today, the 100 gig PAM4 DWDM, I hope that, and I think that's a way to address this, where we can see a clear trend that this beauty is gaining market share in the DCI and Metro market. But before I jump into that, I'll just give you a very, very quick introduction to Smart Optics. So we are a company that was founded 2006. We have the headquarters in Norway. And we do have our entire R&D team and the management team here in Stockholm. So Kista is the main office that we have. We have local sales representation across Europe and in the US. And then we have a global presence through resellers and distributors. When we first started, we were mainly focusing on optics. We have a very strong history around fiber channel. We are still today the only vendor that's approved across the Brocade platform to deliver and sell colored optics into the Brocade fiber channel switches. We are also, since the last 3 years, approved to sell certified optics into the Cisco MDS platform for fiber channel as well. We have changed our focus and our direction a little bit over the last 3 to 4 years, where we focus more and more on the open line system and the system side. Yeah, that's a quick introduction. If you have any further question about the products or the company and so on, I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. Just feel free to reach out to me or one of my colleagues. So if we then jump over to the actual subject of today, the PAM4 technology. So why was this introduced and why was the market driving for a new technology in this portion of the network? If we look at, this is a mixture of technology and standards and so on, but if we look at the client interfaces of 100 gig, those are, you have a variety of different clients today, SR4, LR4 and so on, for different reach options, for single mode fiber, multi-mode fiber and so on. So that's a very mature market and the prices are coming down. You also have a lot of available technology with very advanced modulation formats like coherent transmitters and receivers. That's actually designed to fit into more ROADM-based networks with high capability that can go thousands of kilometers. But there has been a market gap for low cost and cost efficient 100 gig DWDM. And this is something that was heavily driven by Microsoft. They are by far the biggest consumer of those 100 gig PAM4 DWDM. They've literally deployed tens of thousands of links of 100 gig this way. So it's definitely a technology that fits into the market between like 10 to 80 kilometers and also shorter distances. If you don't have fibers, you need to put a DWDM system in place. So what is PAM4? Well, PAM4 is essentially a modulation format. So in this picture, I compare it to the most common modulation format in the market, the non-return to zero, NRZ modulation, where you have, if I point on this slide here, I know it's going to be difficult for you guys over there to see, where you have 2 different light levels or electrical levels, if it's an electrical PAM4, that represent 0 and represent 1. So for each time slot or for each clock cycle, you have 1 bit representation. So that means your bit rate and your baud rate is the same. If we look at the PAM4 signal, pulse amplitude modulated 4-level signal, you have 4 different light levels, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1 light level. That means you have a 2-bit representation for each time slot. So essentially you get twice as much data transmitted over with the same clock speed. In order to achieve 100 gig, there are 2 ways of doing it. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But you could either do it using 2 wavelengths with 25 gig baud rate or 50 gigabit data rate, or you use a 1 carrier solution with only 1 wavelength with a higher baud rate and higher bit rate. This is something that you will see becoming more and more common in the client interfaces. So that's definitely a technology that I will come back to later on here. But the two-carrier solution is what's available today on the DWDM side. So today, the only product on the market that's fully GA that's been delivered in volume is manufactured by Infi. It's called the Color Z module. And it's a PAM4 DWDM QSFP that's fully compliant with a QSFP 28 MSA. It supports both 100 gig and 40 gig Ethernet. It comes with very low power consumption, 5 watts. 5 watts is reasonably high for a QSFP 28, about the equivalence of an ER4. So cooling is an important factor with those systems. And what they use a two carrier or two subcarriers to achieve 100 gig. Each subcarrier is 50 gig. And the way they've done it, in order to be able to fit into a standard 100 gigahertz based filter structure, they use two subcarriers that has an offset from the ITUT center wavelength with plus minus 25 gigahertz. So by doing it that way, they can squeeze two carriers into one wavelength, and it will act and look like one single carrier wavelength. When you deal with bit rates of that speed, still having a direct detect laser and a receiver at 25 gig, you will have some challenges on the optical performance. So if we look at some of the data from those optics, you have a very low output power. The output power is about -8. It requires a very high input power, like -1. That means you cannot even back-to-back those optics. You need to have an amplifier just to do a back-to-back connection. The low transmit power also create another challenge in your network, because if you now mix your services, a 10 gig wavelength with a 100 gig PAM4 wavelength, the 10 gigs will come in significantly higher. So if you want to have the capability of mixing services, you need to take that into consideration when you select your line system, so you can handle that in an efficient way. Another consequence. How do I go back? There. No, I keep on going forward. There we are. Another consequence of this is that you will have a limited dispersion tolerance. The limited dispersion tolerance for those is ±6 kilometers of residual dispersion. And that means that it's going to be a challenge to do a manual DCM or the dispersion compensation in those networks, and you are heavily beneficial of using some tunable version of that, a tunable dispersion compensation unit. They are also requiring very high OSNR, like 31 dB. Those requirements you will also see for other similar directed technologies, like 32 gig fiber channel, CIPRIT 10 and 25 gig as well on DWM. So this is not a unique feature for the PAM4, it's just the nature of the physics. But the conclusion of this is that you essentially need a purpose-built or a line system, an open line system that is designed to handle those kind of challenging transport conditions. So now I talk about this as kind of a challenge and almost kind of trash talk it. Why do I still think that this is a good idea? Well, I think that the first graph here is the main reason. So this graph is now trying to represent the cost of the technology, not how well you negotiated your prices. So this is on a technology basis. If you're going to, I compare this now with a 200 gig ACU type of solution from a cost basis, where you will have an introduction cost that's quite similar. The reason why the PAM4 drives an cost here is that the line system will be something that you need to put in place. That's an active component because it needs amplification and so on. And then from there and on, if you grow your wavelength, you will see that you will have a significant cost reduction. So if you have a number of 100 gig wavelengths that you need to deploy, you will quite quickly, already after the second wavelength, see that you will see a good saving. Another benefit of this is the reduced space. Since this technology now is, I mean, you run those QSFP 28s typically as embedded. That means you plug them into your switch and router. And when you do that, you don't need any transponders or any other equipment that will build additional rack units in space. So if you have a fully built 40-channel system, you typically save around 75% by using this kind of approach and technology. And last but not least, another important factor, reduced power. So we get down to a level of less than 6 watts per 100 gig. And that's very, very attractive numbers if you compare to the best available technology on the market today with coherent technology and so on. So those are the key benefits of using PAM4 DWDM. But I think that the graph on top there is typically what gains attention and what people tend to remember and want to do comparisons with. I also very frequently get questions if this is a proven technology. Unfortunately, I don't have any updated charts for 2018 yet, but if we take the 2017 numbers, I focus here on Q4. So the blue graph here shows the number of directly detect 100 gig pluggable lasers that was deployed during Q4. Those are mainly color C, so it was about 10,500 100 gig DWDM links that was deployed with pluggable PAM4 optics. And if you compare that with all the pluggable both ACOs and DCOs, CFP and CFP2 solutions out there, the number of PAM4s were pretty much the same as the rest of the industry deployed with coherent technology. So the message here is that it's a very well-proven technology that's been deployed in huge volumes. Like I said, Microsoft is the biggest driver behind this, and they were the one pushing for the technology, and they still deploy those in thousands. So that, if you now going to have an interest in this, as I said, you need to have some kind of purpose-built line system to handle those PAM4 signals. So what I'm trying to do here is to give you an update on what you should think about and what kind of requirements that what you need to have a line system that will work well for PAM4 technology. But I would say the first philosophical question where this really makes sense is when you want to run your DWDM optics embedded into your switches and routers. Right now, we see a lot of both operators and data centers using that for 10 gig. It has not been common in the 100 gig space yet, because there hasn't been any QCP28s prior to this that fits that market. So if you have an interest of running it that way, I would say that's the key thing. But if you do it that way, that means everything, all the wavelengths that you will have in your switch and router will go into your PAM4 line system as an alien wavelength. So that means you have to have a line system that has a fully open approach to it. Otherwise, it's going to be it's going to be difficult since everything is supposed to be running as alien. If you want to have a system with a high level of automation, the capability of running mixed services, you need to have some intelligent features around the clients that comes in. A typical desired feature that we see a lot of requests for, and that I know others are also aiming for, and requirements from Microsoft and so on, has been to be able to do automatic protocol detect. The reason why we want to be able to detect the protocols on a spectral level is that we can do intelligent balance and power management of the different signals that comes in, so we can actually achieve the optical performance and the optical budget in a plug-and-play fashion. On the line side, since it's very dispersion sensitive, we've seen that the possibility of doing an automatic measurement on the line fibers is very, very good additional feature. So if you have an OTDR or some other intelligent technology built into your system that can do a link measurement, then you can use that information to set up your tunable dispersion compensation. And by doing it that way, you will always end up in a situation where you have about 0 kilometer residual dispersion in your network, and then you will have a great margin on the PAM4 and good transport capabilities. I will come back to that, because the selection of the tunable dispersion compensation makes makes a challenge on how you should think and what kind of features you can get from a line system that handle PAM4. And the reason for that is that today the only available technology for tunable dispersion compensation is channelized. That means you don't have a continuous dispersion compensation across the entire spectrum. You only dispersion compensate certain part of the spectrum. And when you do that, you will start to squeeze the bandwidth. The more you tune it, the more you will squeeze the bandwidth. And I will go through here on the next couple of slides what kind of impact that gives on the selection of the line system and how that affects the performance as well. There are experimental units out there for continuous tunable dispersion compensation, but today they are really big and bulky and very pricey, so they cannot be built into in a cost-efficient manner and a space-efficient manner built into a line system, at least not to this point. So this is unfortunately a limitation that you have based on the industry of the tunable dispersion compensation. But what we see if we compare different vendors that provide a line system for PAM4 is that there are two technologies used. Either you use a 100 gigahertz spaced TDCM. That means if you don't tune it at all, it will have an 85 gigahertz bandwidth opening. So you can, in that gap, you can easily fit in your two carriers of PAM4. You have the entire spectrum open, so you can also fit in any type of legacy service, 10 gig DWDM service or a coherent 100 gig or something like that. And also you have the bandwidth to support the future 400 gig CR, which is a standard that you will see coming out sometimes next year that will definitely change this industry around DCI as well. And then there are some disadvantages with this technology, so I'll come back to that on the next slide. But the other alternative is to use a 50 gigahertz spaced TDCM with an offset of 25 gigahertz. So you have the opening to fit the exact channel plan of those sub-carriers of the PAM4 wavelength. When you do it this way, you will have an easy time to fit in your carriers. Even if you tune this to maximum, they are typically tunable from 0 to 80 kilometers. So even if you tune it at max, the bandwidth will be a bit more narrow, but you will still fit in your PAM4s in an easy way, so you don't get any penalty from that. However, if you look at the red line here, which is the ITT C-band center wavelength, that one will not only be not dispersion compensated, it will actually be filtered out and suppressed in the system. So if you use this kind of channelized TDCM, you will actually not be capable of mixing that with other services. So then what you do if you use that technology is that you make the decision to go for a PAM4 only system. So those are the two technology choices. So what are the challenges with that portion here, the 100 gig space? Why wouldn't everyone use that all the time? Well, like I said, the more you tune them, the more narrow the bandwidth will get. So I show here 3 examples. Like I did before, I have tuned it at 0 kilometers. I have a wide opening. I can easily fit in my 2 carriers of PAM4, but I can also fit in the future format like a 400 gig ZR. If we tune it a little bit, it will start to get more narrow. When we tune it up to 40 kilometers, we will still have at least 75 gigahertz of bandwidth. That means you can still fit in your 2 sub-carriers and also 400 gig CR signals in the future, 400 gig coherent. However, if we would tune this all the way up to 80 kilometers, then all of a sudden the bandwidth can be down to as low as 25 gigahertz. And once you've squeezed the bandwidth that much, you will see that you will heavily start to impact the PAM4 signals. And you will not have the capability of fitting in a 400 gig coherent in there either in the future. So with that said, if you select to go for a system that has the capability of handling mixed services, you will have the tunable range from only 0 to 40 kilometers. There are, of course, ways of handling that. There are different solutions out there to take care of this, so you can go all the way up to 80 kilometers. But there's a limitation in the dynamic of the tunability that creates some challenges for this. So what's the future of PAM4? Is there a future for it? Well, PAM4 as a modulation format is definitely here to stay. So the evolution of it, if we look at the next step of client optics. So in this case now, I have to take 2 examples. You will start to see client optics coming out GA this year for 400 gig. They will come out in multiple different form factors. In this case, I take two examples, QSFP DD and OSFP, that I think will be the dominant factors, but you have the CFP8 and so on as well. But in there, you would actually use, and you have multiple different flavors of that as well when it comes to the typical ones, single selection. You also have the reach, FR4, LR4, and so on, SR4, the different reach options. But you will also have another factor that's now coming into play here, the number of sub-carriers. So you will have like both FR4 and FR8 and different number of lanes that you do. But in this case, I take an example showing let's say LR4 of a 400 gig. What that will look, it will have 4 carriers on the line side, but the way it will look, it will have each electrical signal coming into the gearbox here will have 25 gigabit per second, so in bit rate, but the baud rate then on the electrical signal will be 25 gig. All in all, you will have 8 of those 50 gigabits forming 1 times 400 gig. In this case, now we go into a gearbox, so we switch it up and modulate it now with 4 times 100 gig bit rates. So that's a 50 gigabaud baud rate for each carrier. And then we run it through the lasers and so on and go through a CWDM filter and then out as a one interface output. But that means we will use both on the electrical side and on the optical side, we will use PAM4. And this is definitely something that we will see in all high-speed interfaces going forward, because you need to use all the newest and smartest and innovative technology around modulation to increase the bandwidth in a cost-efficient manner. On the line side, we will also see PAM4, but here now, I pointed out here at the new standard that's coming out, becomes GA probably sometime next year, the 400 gig CR. That's what it is. It's a 400 gig. It's a standard that's defined by OAF, and it's going to be the first time since 10 gig where you can actually use one 400 gig from vendor A, a coherent 400 gig on one side, and optics from another vendor on the other side. So it will be a common standard on how to deal with the coherent modulation and so on. Those will come out in, I mean, the small and tiny form factors. They will have also some challenging transport requirements, like the minus 10 dB input power, very similar to the PAM4. So with that said, if you've selected a line system that's capable of doing PAM4, you are actually well suited for the future as well with those new, say, low-cost 400 gig coherent optics that will come out. And if we look at the applications, where would the PAM4 fit in a network? It's clear that it doesn't fit for long haul because of those challenging transport conditions. This is what I would say the typical use case that everyone can associate with. You have 2 data centers that you want to interconnect. Typically, you use one primary fiber and one secondary fiber. You run your point-to-point services from A to B, and then you want high capacity. So that's a typical use case where we see, of course, the biggest and the majority of the deployed services today. This is the entire Microsoft deployment is based on this kind of approach between their data centers. Another typical use case that we see where this could fit is when you have a metro environment. Let's say Stockholm, you have whatever it is, 7 major data centers, a couple of Equinixes, and you have an interaction and so on. And where operators have their customers connecting to each and one of those, and this could be a good way of just getting 100 gig wavelength transported in a very cost-efficient manner. And last but not least, we also see a lot of discussions ongoing how you can use this in the future for. In this case, now I shoot as a 5G mobile access architecture. It could be some other distributed access architecture as well with remote PHY and other drivers of high capacity and so on. This is going to be extremely dependent on how the operator have built their network, if there is a fit for PAM4 or not. For some use cases, there will be no fit at all, and for other use cases, it could fit very, very well. So that's some of the applications that we see that PAM4 could be very useful for. And that was all I had. Thank you.
Do we have any Do we have any questions for Kent? No? Okay, please join me in thanking Kent for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, but we've got it in hand. The coffee break is ready for you outside. So I propose that we break, let's call the break at 10:15, and then we reassemble here at 10:45 because the next session is quite packed, so we might need some extra time. So go enjoy the coffee, and please be back here at 10:45. Thank you very much.
All right. Welcome back from the morning break. Now we're going to talk about a couple of days early this year that was quite hectic for us at Netnod. It started in 2nd of January, where we got contacted. And Lars-Johan Liman is going to do the presentation. I was the incident manager of this incident, so if there is any questions in the end, I'll try to help Liman answer them. Welcome Liman to the stage.
So thank you. I'm not sure that this is actually worth any applause. My name is Lars-Johan Liman. I've been with Netnod for God knows how many years. I was involved in this incident on the DNS side. So this is actually a talk about DNS. We will go deep down into DNS in this one. Those of you who are experts in WDM systems, you will probably be a bit out here on the side. But I'll try to do it in a pedagogic way here so that most of you can follow it. So most days I enjoy to go to the office quite much. I have wonderful colleagues. I have fun things to do. But occasionally, things aren't quite as good and interesting as I would like them to be. So in a friendly house in the suburbs of Stockholm, a mobile phone went off, and during my Christmas vacation, I got a call from a person I had never spoken to ever, who introduced themselves as working for a hosting company in another country. And to me it was, hello, who are you? Why are you calling me on my Christmas vacation? But it turned out that this person had found my contact details in a social network that was related to security contacts between people in a social network. So before we go further on, no, we'll do this first. The first contact was on January 2nd, and this hosting provider had observed strange behavior in nearby one of their hosted servers, and they had put some focus on this for quite some time, and the observations they had done together with others working on a larger thing, they had started to realize that Netnod was being drawn into this picture. So what we're talking about here is DNS hijacking. Some of you may have seen or heard things floating around. So this will not be the first presentation on the subject. I would like to give kudos to a couple of others who have done good work. One of them is FireEye. They wrote very early on a good article about this. The link is here. If you can't read it, click on it in the presentation afterwards, download it. And another one is Krebs on Security, a consultant who writes on security-related stuff. There was also a very good presentation at the recent ICANN meeting in Kobe a couple of weeks ago by Merike Keo and Tim April. I haven't found a public reference to that presentation, but nonetheless, they did a very good job, so I want to give kudos to them. And this is how it is described in the FireEye document. If you're not into DNS deeply, this is kind of hard to understand from this logic picture exactly what happened and how. So I'll try to do this in a slower pace and hopefully be able to drag you along so you understand how it happened. So this is Netnod's first-hand account of what happened to us, and we were actually victim of this, but we weren't the main target. The main target was to do something else. We were just a stepping stone to reach that other goal. So here we go. We have to start out with a quick description of the 3 different types of DNS services that we provide at Netnod. We do provide the root service. That is totally separate from everything else. It has a totally separate provisioning system, and the registry system for the root service is nothing like anything else. So let's put that aside. The root was never involved in this incident on any level. Then we have 2 types of customer DNS services for customers. One is the TLD service for top-level domains. These are typically a limited number of very large zones. So it's a limited number of customers, but every customer has a very large zones with lots of records in them. And this is handled mostly manually on Netnode sides. These customers, the configurations, it's mostly done by hand. And the second one is the DNS Enterprise service. And this is something that's sold through resellers, and we have a very large number of end user zones, and each zone is typically very small. It has a web server and a mail MX record in it and not much else, and it doesn't really change over time very much. But the number of customers, the individual customers come and go. So there's churn in the metadata around these. So these are kind of orthogonal optimizations. Large zone with churn in the zone, but the metadata is stable, or stable zones, a lot of them, but the metadata changes. And here, that's automated. The last one is automated through an API that we have, and this was one of the attack vectors that they tried to use to modify DNS data. We'll get to that later. So, what was the goal of this attack? We believe, we don't know for sure, but we believe that the attackers wanted to obtain sensitive information from certain web sites. And in order to do so, that's on the next slide. They had an idea on how to do this. We believe that this was actually government-sponsored activities, and that was an eye-opener for me. I've seen a lot of bad shit on the network, but it's usually been based on my perception of the 2 main reasons for doing so. One is revenge. You're pissed with someone, you want to attack their servers, block them, and you create a lot of attention to this. The other one is money. Blackmailing, viruses, spam, what have you, but it's money-driven. This was neither. This seems to be information warfare, so to speak. And this is a long-term project that's been ongoing for many, many months, and as far as I know, it's actually still ongoing. And again, Netnod was not a target. We think that this was the plan. We're quite certain that this was the way they wanted to do things. They wanted to set up a proxy server for web services to act as a man in the middle, so that a legitimate user would log into the wrong server, this proxy server, and it would yield the credentials, the username and password, and then that server would keep that login information, but pass the traffic through to the legitimate server, so the user wouldn't notice anything, in theory, and the attacker would then have gained the access tokens that they need to reach the real server. And to do that, set up a proxy server, then disturb the DNS system and make the changes. Here's the hijacking. Use the disturbed DNS system to misdirect the authentic users to use the web proxy instead, get the credentials, return the system to normal, and then use the credentials that you just stole. So in normal life, this is how the DNS works. A client, someone's laptop, uses a DNS resolver, which in theory talks to the root name server, talks to a server for a top-level domain, possibly further down the tree for a customer. And that's a step that happens before the actual web traffic. So you first get the IP address for the web server, then you use the second step to actually talk to the web server. So what we saw were actually 2 different approaches to fiddling with the system. The first one was to fiddle with glue records. For those of you who aren't deep into the DNS, there's something called glue records. They are hideous. They are an artifact of a bad design, but they are nonetheless quite necessary in the system. They will appear on a later slide. So we go back to the picture where where the client wants to contact the real web server at 10.0.0.1 in my picture, and the attacker the first step is to establish this web proxy. This is a very simple thing. You need a web server, a transparent one that can send traffic through, but also kind of take the traffic and store the parts of it that you want to retain. And the real web server here is the real target. That's the one you want to get into to look for information or modify something or what have you. So the first step is to establish and create this web proxy. It can be anywhere on the network, typically a hosted server somewhere. The second one is to disturb the DNS system. And now we need to look and focus on parts of it. So we will, this is, my idea here is that, sorry, that's the one. These boxes up here are the name server for the root level and for the top level domain level, and then the customer has service for its DNS on a third level. That one was not involved in this case. So 3 steps: root, top level domain, and customer. If we focus on these two, the root server has delegations for all the top level domains. It has virtually no information about them, but it has referral information. It will tell you that XX is over there and net is over there. So in this picture, the 2 top boxes here are actually the same server, but the 2 different delegations going to different servers. Okay, so the root service was not involved here. So it happened on the next level. But there's information in the root server. If you look at this information, the root server has the name of the name server for the top level domain server. And in this particular case, the name of the name server contains the name of the provider of the DNS service, DNSprov.net. You will also notice that the name of the name server is not located below XX. The name of the server doesn't end in XX, it ends in net. So the name of the server sits in a different part of the tree. The DNSprov.net zone, which is served in this different part of the tree, is not served by the same server. So there are 2 name servers at DNSprov involved. One called NS, one called S1. S1 holds the information for DNSprov themselves. NS is the commercial service that holds the information for XX. If we now shift one more here, you can create another domain in the net system called other. And if you create that and tell the world and the systems that it's served by DNSprov.net, let's see here, you will notice that that name here is the same as the one used for the top level domain up here. I can create any name. This could be any random string of letters. And I can put whatever name server I want in there. And when I do that, I can also add something called a glue record. I can tell the system, by the way, the IP address for this machine is an IP address. And here, it's where the design of the DNS kicks in, because it's not quite certain whether or not, you actually need to have that record in place. So registrars and registries will, in some cases, put it in there for safe measures. So by registering a name through the normal path of possibly a reseller, but a registrar for the net domain, and then it will talk to the registry, and that will generate its own file. If you go through that normal path of registering a new domain name, and you add this glue record, chances are that it will not be strictly checked by any of these parties, and it will end up in the zone file. So now we have the same name in two different parts of the DNS world. And if someone now looks for a net name that looks for the other .NET name, they will get that glue record as part of the referral when the net server says, other.net is over there. And by the way, the IP address for that machine is this. That's the glue record that follows along there. If you don't strictly check on every level here, you may well eat that record. And the next time, when you look for something in the XX domain, you will use that glue record that you got from somewhere else, and you will suddenly start to talk to a different machine than the authentic one. So instead of talking to the name server for the customer, instead of talking so where are we? This is actually, wow. I just realized the probably one level too much in here. When you ask for the name for the customer.xx, which is one floor below, when you register, yes, you can register the domain in XX, that's what you do. And you add the glue record, and you put in the same name as here. You talk to the wrong name server. This is, by using the inappropriate glue record, you end up with at the wrong address. So there are two name servers now for customer.xx. One that's operated by the attacker, and one is the authentic one. And the DNS resolver will possibly follow the inappropriate glue record. This is not a 100% certain attack, but a small fraction of clients will do this. And if you let it sit there and you work by numbers and do your thing, there's a fair chance that you can succeed in doing this. Now, the really interesting part that makes this go under the radar, it is that this is a proxy server for DNS. So every query coming in from a decent resolver here will enter here, and most of them will just be forwarded to the normal resolver. This one will actually get an authentic response for most queries, except for that specific web server that you want to attack. So only when you ask for the name www.customer.xx, then it will return the IP address for the web proxy instead of the IP address of the real web server. So the next step will be that the client talks to the web proxy, not knowing anything, and it's a proxy, so it will forward the traffic to the real web server, and you will get your normal login picture, and you will enter your credentials, and you will submit them, and the web proxy will eat them, and then forward the traffic happily to the customer, the real web server. Now there are two things in here that can help you. Your first reaction is, what about certificates? Well, yes, you're right. This web proxy probably doesn't have the appropriate certificate for that web service, if it's an HTTPS connection. But if you have this in place, what's there to say that the certificate authority isn't also fooled by this setup? Aha, exactly. So what you do first, before you start to, so to speak, send the customer, is to quickly get a certificate from a certificate authority that is DNS-based, to put that in your web proxy here, because that will automatically turn up as, you know, the lock is locked on your SSL connection and the client has no chance to figure out what's going on here. Because there are precious few browsers and people who enable, you know, thing you can do is you can tell the browser to signal if a certificate changes. If there's a site you go to often and suddenly there's a new certificate, you can ask the browser and say, hey, something is going on here. There's a new certificate. Is this really a valid one? But then you also have to have the clue to investigate, to figure out whether it was an authentic change. Maybe it was just getting old. You had to replace it. Or is this a false one? So that's really, really tricky. And then after you have obtained the credentials from the authentic user, the attacker can then just do a normal login. You return the DNS system to normal, everything works, and the attacker can then log in using the stolen credentials, nothing special, just log into the website and do whatever they want. I had something else in mind here. Yes, returning to normal. So in this scenario, there are precious few things that will signal to you that something is going on, because almost every DNS query is forwarded here appropriately to the real name server. So you get your normal answers. So there's nothing strange. You get the normal web server, you think, everything runs as normal. So what's there to say that something's going on? Well, there is actually one thing, and that is in here, backing up again. Here, when the client receives this information, which is false, it's for this web server, it's not that one. That comes in a DNS record. If you have secure DNS enabled, DNSSEC, that will actually help you in this case, because under the assumption that the attacker does not have access to the DNSSEC private key that signs the records, and that the security delegation is still in place, they cannot sign this record. And if you have a DNSSEC validating resolver up here, it will flag that, whoops, this is not properly signed. This is not a record that you should look at. And that works as long as they don't have access to the private key, and as long as the security delegation from the parent domain is still intact. So this was the first approach we saw. And they actually used this to try to get access to the portal that I mentioned early on for modifying, for our DNS customers to modify their data for the zones. Fortunately, we have DNSSEC enabled, and it didn't quite work. There is a second approach you can do. So we go back, we have the same setup. We still look at the delegation here. So what you can do in this case is you have the top-level domain and the customer here, and nothing is changed in this part over here. But you have, again, the name server for the customer is called NS, and the server for the service provider is called S1. Sorry, that's the one for the top-level domain here and DNSProv here. So these are two different names that are run in the same zone. The IP address for the customer thing is located down here in this zone. So it sits it's operated by DNSProv, and it sits in the zone here. It's not part of any registry system operated by someone outside. This name is, though. And if you manage to change that, you can change the entire delegation for the entire zone DNSProv.net. In order to do so, you have to again go through the registrar thing, but this time it's a bit more tricky. The first one, it was sufficient to register a new domain name and just add a name server of your choice and the glue record of that one. You don't need anyone else's credentials for doing this. To do this, you need to find possibly the reseller, but at least the registrar for the parent domain, and you need to somehow get access to that registrar. It has to be the right registrar for the domain name. So when DNSProv has a relationship with the sponsoring reseller, the attacker can, in this certain case, go directly to the registrar and attack there. If they manage to get the necessary credentials to log into the web portal system at the registrar, they can modify the registration bits for the domain. And by changing that name server record, they can redelegate the entire zone to somewhere else. And now you have, again, you can change the IP address for the thing that you really want to attack. And we come back to this situation. Now it's no longer a fake glue record. Now the entire delegation is changed. And you have, again, the similar situation where you talk to a name server that you don't think you're talking to. Again, it's a proxy, so it will forward most queries to the appropriate name servers. You will not really notice any different things, except for when you query for this web proxy address. This is more difficult to attain because you need the credentials to the registrars. You have to somehow get hold of these credentials. The second thing is that in this case, you're really mucking with the delegation here for this specific customer, the customer being DNSProv. No, sorry, well, yes. You're mucking with the delegation, which means that you can also muck with the security security records that connect the DNSSEC bits between the various levels in the tree. This means that you can change and you can make truly valid records that the validator here, up here, the resolver, cannot identify as false using DNSSEC. And this is also extremely difficult to detect. If you have an automated registry that handles these updates automatically through a web portal, the chances are very slim that they're going to suspect anything if you just make a change to your name server record. And again, the continuation of this is the same. You direct the client to the web proxy, you steal the credentials, and the rest is just the same traffic. And again, of course, the certificate authority can be tricked or fooled in the same way, so you can obtain a certificate for your web server. And again, stolen credentials. So these two scenarios we actually saw, and we have some observations from this. One is that the attacker in this case has really deep knowledge and understanding of not only the DNS, but also how registrars act, how registries act, how the entire system plays together, how the very different corners of the network in the DNS tree actually work together with glue records and delegations and so on. These are not script kiddies. These are people who have a very good understanding of the DNS. Also, it was very carefully planned and carried out. This went under the radar entirely. There are many small steps that need to be taken in the right order for this to kick in and work. They combined many types of systems trying to reach their end goal, the DNS. We've seen in other parts, they mucked with the IMAP systems to look through mail to see if things were forwarded in mail between parties and so on. They've mucked with registrar systems and so on. We were fortunately not compromised when it came to the mail side of things. But this, as I said, this is a very big thing that's been ongoing for months, and we know that other parties have been unfortunate enough to have their mail compromised. And there was also a piece of very careful timing. The attacks we've seen were around Christmas, during vacation, January 2nd. No one is in the office. No one monitors things really, really carefully those days. So they actually picked the dates carefully. So these are very smart and dangerous people. And also, as opposed to DDoS attacks, which always get a lot of attention because people have problems and things happen in front of them, this was designed to be a stealth operation. They didn't want us to notice. They didn't want anyone to notice that what things were going on here. So this is, you know, under the radar entirely. What did we suffer? We suffered the modification of glue records, yes, modification of name server records, and later on the DS records, the secure delegations. We have seen that false web certificates have been issued in the name of Netnod. And these attacks, again, were carried out during 3 focused time periods between December 14th and the 2nd of January. So these were focused things going on for a short while and then return to normal. Focused thing and then return to normal. 3 different time intervals. So what have we done in the aftermath? Well, we've employed something called registry lock for critical domains. We have a number of domains for Netnod, but only very few of them are actually used in operations, like names of name servers and stuff. And most registries actually, or several at least, provide a service called registry lock, which means that we can no longer go to our registrar web portal and make changes to our delegation for these domain names. We have to go through a complicated process with sending papers and calling people and what have you. So this takes a lot of time and actually also money. It costs a bit to turn on registry lock and to do administration, and that's a good thing because slow systems are very hard to break. When lots of human eyes look on things step by step, it's much harder to break, and that's the entire idea with these registry locks. We have, of course, revocated the false certificates that we saw. We've changed passwords in many places, we've upgraded software, and we also have modified access control lists to servers and systems. What did we learn from this? Well, long passwords. I've come to realize that it doesn't matter which character you use in a password. The only thing that matters is the length. It's because that just adds, you know, factors of 10s every time you add another character. Also, beware of spear phishing attacks. We don't believe that this was part of the attack this time, but we've seen in other corners of this that spear phishing attacks with very carefully crafted directed emails which seem to have legitimate content can trick people into divulging information that they shouldn't and so on. 2-factor authentication, this is good shit. This is something that we should always have everywhere, I think. I'm not sure it will protect us in all cases, but it makes things a lot harder for the bad boys. You should monitor your certificates. You probably all have certificates for web services and other things. But do you monitor? There are transparency channels where the certificate authorities go together and publish all certificates that are issued. This means that you can see, by using search tools here, which certificates have been issued in my name. And you can see, oh, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. That's not mine. Why is that issued using my domain name? And by monitoring such channels, you can get a head start, and you can realize you get a trigger when something starts to happen which shouldn't. a really good place is crt.sh, very easy to search. There's a place in GitHub which has software for doing monitoring tools for this and so on. So look into that. DNSSEC actually helps. It's not a guarantee, but it actually makes things harder. So please employ that if you don't. It saved some of our ass this time. It could save some of yours as well. And if you have critical domains that are critical for your automation, please use registry lock or consider using registry lock, because that is also a mitigating factor. We also learned some social things from this. One thing is that systems or parts or what have you that you see as non-critical can be combined as pieces of a puzzle to create long chains of stepping stones. So you really have to put your imagination into how would someone be able to use this together with that and that and that and that to reach that goal over there. And that's an exercise worth doing, I can tell you. The number of attack vectors towards the DNS is still very high. DNS is an old protocol. It was designed in a time when security was not an issue. It has lots of patches and band-aid on it, but still there's lots of work to do. And don't just defend yourself. Think of yourself as something, a tool that could possibly be used to attack someone else. And put yourself outside your own systems to try to imagine how you would, as an attacker, how you would use your system, your own systems to attack someone else. That's also a worthwhile exercise. You will possibly, hopefully, think of things that you haven't thought of yet. And also, there are real wars out there. This again, this was not scripted. This was not blackmailing. This was not for money. This was other stuff. This had substantial financial backing, and they don't break. They just if there's a problem somewhere, they step to the side and do something else. They want to reach that goal and just try to make sure that you're not part of their solution. And last but not least, social networks are important. If we hadn't been participating in conferences, talking to people, making ourselves known to the wider internet community on the globe, they wouldn't have had my phone number to call. We would never have received information about this, or we would have way too late. That was what I intended to tell you. Any questions? There's total silence. There. I don't really see your face because I have lights, but I saw an arm, please. There's the mic for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Magnus Huss, Interaction. I was wondering what kind of cost or any implications that did this have for you? And do you know anything about, I mean, in the next level, other customers and or organizations that were hurt?
I don't think we've done the monetary, calculations about this. It's taken a good number of man-hours to, go through this, sift through things, look things over, do all these upgrades and stuff. But I don't have a number to it. No, I'm sorry. Fortunately, very few of our customers were actually hit by this. We've talked to those who were affected by the false portal, Netnod portal that I managed to set up. We believe that there was no major impact to any of those customers. We've had a few DNS customers that were affected by this. We've talked to them. I have, no idea what the costs were to them. I see one hand back there.
So would you be able to elaborate a bit about how they got your credentials to, I understand the glue records, how they did that, but for the second wave, are you able to say anything about how they got the credentials?
No, I'm sorry, that's not part of this this presentation. But they are very good at getting credentials. So that's what the main focus, what they do. The DNS is a tool for them to get other credentials, but having one set of credentials can get them to the next set. So yes, it's definitely the right question to ask, but I'm not willing to go deeper into that here and now.
How did they discover this, and what's the time frame from starting, knowing something was wrong, and discovering the whole setup?
I believe, again, we were contacted by this hosting company. The information we got from them is that they had been observing strange behavior for almost a year. Netnod was not involved in most of that. It was just towards very close to when they called us that they got information that the activities had started to spread into Netnod land, so to speak, because they were working with other players and doing other stuff. And we believe that you saw that we could trace back the first attacks to just before Christmas, and we were contacted in January. So a week, 2 weeks maybe. Before that there were activities ongoing, but they didn't relate to Netnod. I'll be around, and if anyone wants to ask more questions or talk, so just please come out to me.
Okay. Matta is also around as well.
Yes.
Please join me in thanking Liman for the presentation.
Thank you.
So the next speaker is Patrick Jones, Senior Director, Global Stakeholder Engagement from ICANN. Patrick coordinates ICANN's global engagement activities across regional and functional teams. He joined ICANN in March 2006 and has been active in the internet governance, policy, operations, and security area since 2000. He's also an invited participant in ICANN's Security and Stability Advisory Committee. So please join me in welcoming Patrick to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here. This is my first visit to Sweden. And I'm going to be giving a bit of background of our domain abuse activity reporting system. Some brief introductions. I've been at ICANN for 13 years. 5 of those years were part of our ICANN security team. That team is now part of our ICANN Office of the Chief Technology Officer. And that is the team that leads our domain abuse activity reporting project. So I'm delivering this information on their behalf, but happy to take some questions about this effort. Anything too specific, I would direct you to them. But in any case, this is a new effort that is being led within our team. And we're trying to provide this information to the ICANN community so that it can better inform policy decisions that are happening. Some more background about ICANN as an organization. We are a technical coordination body. Like Netnod, we are a root server operator, but we have other technical functions. Some of those include managing the relationship of our contracted parties. So in the previous presentation, we heard about registries and registrars. We now have over 1,200 generic top-level domain registries that are under contract with us. And there are a number of technical features that we have to manage in order to handle those relationships. We also, through our affiliate, the Public Technical Identifiers, they manage the IANA functions, which are the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority functions. And a big one of those, some of you are probably familiar with domain naming security extensions, or DNSSEC. We manage the key ceremony process, and that's one of the things that I've been involved in during my time at ICANN. I was part of key ceremony number 1 back in 2010, and have been a regular participant in those ceremonies a few times per year. So we heard in the last presentation, domain names are often the trigger for abuse and misuse in fraudulent purposes online. And we've seen a number of attackers make use of domain names as the way to leverage the domain name system for some other purpose that they may have. So there's a growing need for proactive detection and monitoring, mitigation strategies by providers. There really is there may be a lack of knowledge about the types and concentrations of the abuse that's happening in the networks. And there's also a lack of knowledge about how providers might be performing in comparison with others in the DNS ecosystem. Abuse monitoring is often something that is overlooked by organizations because there might be a cost associated with this. There really isn't a unified system for understanding the types of monitoring that should be done and the reporting. And there have been, until recently, very few incentives to monitor the abuse that's happening in networks. So we have this tool, we call it the Domain Abuse Activity Reporting System, or DAAR. This is a system for reporting on domain name registration and abuse data. We look at all of the generic top-level domain registries that are under contract with ICANN. We are also working with the ICANN-accredited registrars. Their data is not yet part of the public data that we're releasing in reports, but I'll go into this more specifics about what we're collecting in these in the system and how it's being used. Again, this studies all of the generic top-level domain registries. It does allow for historical research, and currently we're focusing on 4 types of threats: phishing, botnet command and control networks, malware, and spam. And spam is being looked at because it is often a gateway to other types of attacks. We are using a large set of abuse feeds or block lists, and we're trying to take a very scientific approach to this so that the work that we're doing is transparent and reproducible by other organizations. So the graphic is not shown here, but what this can be used for is for studying malicious registration behaviors. It can also report on threat activity at the registrar or the top-level domain level. It can give some historical information to the types of threats that are happening across the network and within domain registration activity. This information is useful for the operational security community, academic researchers, and others that try to use this information to understand where attacks might be concentrated and how they can study patterns of behavior that are happening in the system. Again, this also can help you better configure your networks. You can understand what types of anti-abuse programs or terms of service might help your control and mitigate the attacks that you might be seeing in your networks. And ultimately, we're hoping that this will provide the internet technical community with more informed decision-making and data about policies that may need to be implemented and can help make the ecosystem stronger as a whole. So this next set is going into more specifics about the methodology that we're currently using with this project. We are looking at DNS zone data, whois or registration data, and we're trying to make use of open source tools or commercial abuse threat feeds. This gives you a bit of visualization of the methodology that we're using. We have the centralized zone file data system, or CZDS. It is a centralized system managed by ICANN. It collects all of the zone files from the top-level domain registries. So we have the total list of resolved domains across these TLDs. We're using the whois information that is currently available. I know with the general data protection regulation since last year, the amount of information in whois has been substantially redacted, and that's okay. But we are making use of the information that is available and putting it into this system. So to drill down a bit further into what types of information is available, Again, I mentioned that we're using the domain names that are in the zone files. I think as of this month, we're up to 194 million domains that are in the system. This is across 1,220 generic top-level domains. We are receiving expressions of interest from country code top-level domain operators. Their data is not in the system as of yet. Our Office of the CTO team is having regular discussions with those interested parties that are at country codes, and they may be included into the DAAR system going forward, but for now, it is limited to generic registry data. So the DAAR system uses the published WHOIS registration data. This is an example of, if you do a lookup for google.com, you would see this information in WHOIS. We focus on the registrar name and the IANA ID because then we can track the activity at the registrar level using this information. The challenge with this is that it does rely on accurate registrar reporting of the information that's in WHOIS and scaling the data collection. 194 million domains is a large data set, and we are trying to make this information available on a monthly basis. Currently, the DAAR system does not report by specific top-level domain registry, so we're not naming the names of the TLDs where there are concentrations of activity. This may be something that happens down the line, but for now we're trying to use this to highlight the trends of where the activity is occurring, but not to the specific identified registry. So as I mentioned, the DAAR system uses multiple abuse registration blocklist sets. We're trying to make this so that any researcher out there that might also be subscribing to the same blocklist feeds may be able to reproduce this data. We think it's important as ICANN has its mission to be accountable and transparent in the work that we do, and so we're not trying to produce something that couldn't be reproducible by others. So in the monthly reports that we're publishing, and we now have historical data going back to January of 2018 that shows added abuse domains. It shows the percentage of abuse domains by legacy top-level domain, which we refer to as the top-level domains that existed before the current round. So that would be anything that was in .net, .org, .pro, any top-level domain that was before, let's say, 2007 or 2008 would be considered legacy. And after that would be the newer names, such as .stockholm, .taxi, .food, etc. You might be seeing some of these out there with movies are using .movie, .film, and we're trying to provide this information as a way to track the abuse that's happening in these top-level domains. So again, the DAAR system counts unique abuse domains. So if it appears on any abuse data set, it only counts in the R system only once. This provides some background on the type of threat types that we're seeing. So again, phishing, malware, spam, botnet, command and control. And we're trying to use this so that we can provide things that are regularly appearing in academic literature and used commonly in the security community. And hopefully you're using them in monitoring your own networks. You might be looking at abuse types by malware type, by botnet type, etc. We are not creating our own reputation block list. We're using a composite set of data, and we're doing this so that it's the same abuse data that any other internet industry organization might be using. We know there are a lot of academics that are interested in this information. ICANN has an open data project, and ideally this information that we have in the DAAR system will be part of the open data project. At the ICANN meeting in Kobe just 2 weeks ago, there were a number of sessions about both the DAAR system, our open data project, and also on the security threats that the internet community is seeing. So this has become a regular topic at our meetings. Our next major ICANN meeting is in Marrakesh, Morocco in June, and this will continue to be a topic at that meeting and in others. Does the DAAR system identify all abuse data types? It does not currently do that. We are listing the domain names that are identified by third parties to us. And we're only putting in the system those that are associated with generic top-level domains. We know that there's significant abuse that also happens at the country code level. And for those country codes that have expressed an interest in the system, they are working with our Office of the CTO team to share data information. It's just not part of the public reports that we're posting. This is a list of the data sets. Some of these will be familiar to you if you're making use of them. Anti-phishing Working Group has several. These organizations also participate within ICANN as part of our security and technical community and meetings. And so we know that at least the organizations that are familiar with these this would be a common set of data that you're probably seeing. So again, to show how this can be useful, we have a snapshot from our January 2019 report. And this shows the percentage of abusive domains across the data set. The vast majority of the domains that are abused are involving spam. There is a tiny percentage that are part of botnet command and control networks, a larger percentage that are phishing domains or malware domains, and these are distributed somewhat equally across the legacy space and in the new generic top-level domain space. Of the domains that are in the DAAR reporting system, 88% of those, so the vast majority of the 194 million domains, are in the legacy space, and that's partly because the .com space is the largest top-level domain and has the majority of those names. But then when we look a little bit closer, and if you look at the percentage that are identified as domains that have some type of security threat with them, we can see there's a bit of breakdown within those domains that have so the 0.4% that were botnet command and control domains. Most of those are in the legacy domain space. Most of those are in .com, .net, a few in .org. But we're starting to see trends where some of the newer top-level domains are attractive for those that want to be using spam. And one of the trends is that in the top-level domains that are very cheap or offered for a penny or $1 to a penny per domain, those are very attractive for spammers and for the distribution of malware and phishing. So we want to highlight those trends and eventually be able to report on the individual registries where that type of activity is occurring. We do know that when we see concentrations of activity, our compliance team is able to work with our security team and raise those issues directly with the registry. Perhaps the registry doesn't even know that they're being abused that way, and so we've already seen examples where we've used this information and gone to the registry and they've been able to either take the domains down or look into what the issue is and take appropriate action. So to give you the current status, The Office of the CTO team has published this methodology for review and done public sessions at the ICANN meetings. We did take in all of the comment from the internet community and provide our responses to those comments in February. And then we've started to publish the first set of the monthly reports. This will be an ongoing thing, so there is a page of the CTO website as part of ICANN.org where you can see these reports. Currently, they're aggregated and anonymous, so we're not listing the particular TLDs by name. Eventually, there may be updates and changes to this, and one of the things that the security team is interested in getting community feedback is, would it be helpful to the network operators and others that are out there to see more specific information. Again, by putting this into the open data platform, we're hoping that then others in the internet community can make use of this information and perhaps identify other threats that might not be part of the phishing, malware, spam, and botnet set. You might identify other types of threats with this information. And there are some licensing issues, so we are in the process of trying to make more and more of this information available. A bit about next steps. We are having sessions like this with various sectors around the world and trying to raise the awareness of this project. One of the problems is that the registration data issues they're hard to scale. Registrar information has some inaccuracies, so we're trying to address those issues by working with other parties to put more information in. So where do we want to go from here? We always are interested in hearing from operators, from researchers and others in the internet community to see how this information can be made more user-friendly, more useful to you, how this can also help shape policies that happen at ICANN and also in other places. Our next set of meetings will be next month in Bangkok, Thailand, as part of the GDD Industry Summit. So if you're a registry or registrar, that might be an attractive event for you. Alongside that event, we're also doing an Internet Domain Symposium, and we're co-hosting that event with DNS OARC, the Operations Analysis and Research Center. So we're expecting 400 or 500 participants from around the world at these meetings. The discussions will continue, and we'll have sessions in Morocco and at other regional events. So we look forward to sharing this information about this project in other venues. So with that, I think if you have specific questions about the DAAR project, I'm going to direct you to either contact John Crane or Samana, who's our newest member of the team. She's based in Rotterdam, and both of them can be reached through DAAR@ICANN.org. Thank you very much.
So anything for Patrick today, or no? Okay, well, join me in thanking Patrick for presentation. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So the final speaker of this morning's session is Kristian Larsson, a senior expert in IP routing and system management at Deutsche Telekom, where he is working on TerraStream, the next generation fixed network. His focus is currently with provisioning of this network in a completely automated fashion, but he also covers areas of network design, long-haul opto, and testing. So please join me in welcoming Kristian to the stage.
Hi. Even got my full title in there. That's the kind of title you get when you work for a German company. Anyone hungry? I got the dreaded just before lunch slot. Originally, I intended to do a demo, but due to technical limitations of the presentation setup, that's not possible. So I'm going to do the next best thing, which is to talk about the dry theory behind building robust network automation systems. How do I, oh, here's the clicker. Okay, let's see. Right, I think I work for Deutsche Telekom, right? And I have been working a couple of years on building these sort of network automation systems. I lead a small team, so I have some thoughts, and I thought I'd share those. So I want to talk about some important things. The evolution of automation systems. We're going to talk about interfaces, APIs, or things between systems or between people and how they work in an organization. We're going to touch upon correctness and say a few words on typing, interesting stuff, and static validation. And we're also going to talk a little bit about deliberate design, sort of how do you actually build network automation systems for robustness and safety. Let's see here. So network automation, I think that just like SDN and some of these other sort of hype terms, it has become a little bit difficult to actually understand what someone means when they say, oh, we do network automation. There's a similar question to be asked, sort of, what does it mean when you have a network automation? There's a similar question when we're talking about autonomously driving cars. What does it actually mean to have an autonomous cars? The car industry, unlike our industry, is much better in this regard, and I think that they've pulled forward sort of a definition. They have these 5 levels that you typically talk about, where level 0 is a completely manual car, and a level 5 car is one that doesn't even have a steering wheel, and then you have level 1 through 4 that does something in between. For network automation, we don't talk about this, but a couple of weeks ago, I got these slides. They are from a presentation held by Sam Aldrin. Sam works for Google, and he did some presentation at the OFC, the Optical Fiber blah blah conference. I didn't actually see his presentation, but I got the slides, and I thought he really sort of nailed this down. So I borrowed his slides. They're his, all of it. There are 3 phases. Phase 1, improve repeatable tasks, right? This is typically how we start out. We write we identify a task, it is repeatable. We write some scripting. Shell, Perl, Python, pick your tool of choice, right? The way we do this development is typically in a very siloed environment. We solve problems for ourselves. We're on our team, I do network automation for the network, and I'm gonna put together scripts to solve my problems, right? Another team does servers, and they're gonna solve their problems. But we're getting things done. Looking at what we end up with, the system, if we can call it a system, it might just be a bunch of script, is probably not going to be very deterministic. There's going to be poor safety of the system. It doesn't scale very well. It is, however, great for new introductions. Sam says most web operators are here. I say most service providers are probably here. Oh, right clicker. Phase 2. So writing network automation systems is really about writing software, right? And software is something that we have been doing for some time. I wouldn't say that humanity has figured out software engineering, but there are certainly sort of best practices on how to do things. So we're going to apply more of structured code. We're going to have tested code. Maybe you have a design of your system, an intentional, deliberate design. It might even be a good design. As the system goes, we're probably going to implement more of proper state machines. We're going to be able to react to things happening in the network, and we're going to be able to take care of these things. Development happens in a less siloed way. We realize that our team is not the only team that's doing automation. There's lots of other teams in the organization that are doing automation, and there's a common foundation for all of us. How do you event management framework, or whatever you want to call it, right? So we're going to start sharing code. We're going to reuse things. You might do things. External safety system is listed here. I think it's Google is doing lots of this, right? So canaries, blast radius containment. You might or might not do this. In the end, we end up with something which is much more mature. It scales better, and it is certainly has much better safety. It automates the majority of use cases and does so 90% of the time. Most of the processes that you have within your organization are now converted into code. I forgot to show one thing, which is perhaps the most excellent thing about these slides, right? Look at the picture. I love this. So this, I'm going back here. Phase 1, a prototype. It's a coin cell battery, some switch thing, and a LED, right? Phase 2, we've evolved to a breadboard design. It's a little bit more advanced, right? And then phase 3, the ultimate. It's completely packaged up nicely in FPGA, 7 nanometer, you know, the whole shebang, right? And this is where we want to go with automation systems as well. So this isn't 98%. It doesn't mean, you know, some of the phases of managing the network. It's not like you're doing just zero-touch provisioning or you still do software upgrades manually. Nope, this is 100%. All of it is done by a system. So instead, we expose essentially the network and all of its functions through an API. We have design rules and policy input. You tell it, oh, I want a network for a data center with 10,000 servers, and the system is going to figure out the rest, right? That's the kind of thing. You don't tell it the details of how to do something. That's encoded in your system. This is where Google want to go, or is at, and it's certainly where we want to be too. Why is this important? So society runs on the network, right? If you look at any service providers, they have converged pretty much everything they have, all the services, on top of a single IP and MPLS network. If you're a mobile provider, you've done this. I work for mobile providers. There are a couple of them in here. They've done this. You have customers of service providers, important ones, maybe, you know, airports or hospitals, or I don't know, name something else that's important for society, right? And they are all going to be running pretty much on the same network. So society needs this network to be up, and if we're going to run this network with software, then that software has to be working, right? And that's why we're here talking about robust systems. So remember this when you're in the shower or wherever it is you're thinking about these kinds of things. So Jeff Bezos, the book guy, the guy, I mean, he founded Amazon, right? He, in 2000-something, he came out with this big mandate. This is actually, it's a rant. It was someone who worked for Amazon, then moved to Google, and he was not happy with Google internal something, so he was talking about how great it is at Amazon. But this was yeah, sort of ironic. Anyway, you can. It's a funny read actually. So go look at it. This is a long text, but let's just read it from the top, right? So this is what Jeff said. All teams will henceforth expose their data and functionality through service interfaces. Teams must communicate with each other through these interfaces. And then third from the bottom, I have a pointer here. All service interfaces, without exception, must be designed from the ground up to be externalizable. That is to say, the team must plan and design to be able to expose the interface to developers in the outside world. No exceptions, and then you'll be fired if you don't follow it, right? So think about this. I think this is really sound advice. It allows for self-service of everything. In any organization bigger than, let's say, one person, you're going to have communication going on. So we need to communicate with each other to make things work, to get things done, right? You run the network, I run the servers, God forbid. And for these things to work together, we have to communicate with each other. Usually that communication is between people, and people communicate through natural language, which isn't very precise, but as we humans are good fuzzy parsers, it sort of works out anyway. If I ask you for connectivity, remember I run a service, right? I ask you for connectivity, network connectivity. Then you're going to go do this. You probably have your automation system. So what happens is that you go to your automation system. Maybe it's Ansible. You run a playbook, and then it does something to the network, right? Advancing and evolving in the era of automation systems, I think means that we have to throw out the humans from the communication path. My automation system needs to talk to your automation system, so these two systems together can figure things out. These imprecise interfaces that humans have between them just doesn't add anything to the mix and should be eliminated. We don't need to eliminate humans, but we need to just not constantly be in the communication path. This is what Jeff figured out, right? And it's going pretty well for Amazon. Take inspiration. So interfaces or APIs, these things, they are important. And we just talked about how it could look in an organization, right, between many different systems. But for a network automation system, what you're probably going to start out with is to talk to the network, because that's the purpose of a network automation system. The network consists of devices, and those devices have interfaces. Legacy-wise, and too often, really today as well, one of those interfaces is going to be the CLI, command line interface. This is something that's really built for humans. It's not typed at all, it's just text. You throw text at it and it throws some text back to you, right? But it's the same thing. We as humans, fuzzy parsers, we can handle this, it's not a problem. But from a programmatic perspective, this is really horrible, right? The output in one of these commands could change at the whim. So a developer at Cisco says, oh, thank you. A developer at Cisco says, this output looks much better with a line break. I'm going to insert a line break, and bam, all of your programmatic, whatever it is, parsing this will break, right? So we need something better, and this is why we have data models. So if you look at more modern interfaces like NetConf, RESTConf, GNMI is a Google thing, right? These are all modeled by Yang. So a data model is something that defines the values, the names of values and the type of values that we can send across an interface. You can think of a data model somewhat like a contract, right? So we write down what it is that I'm allowed to send to you, and we write down what you're allowed to send to me, and this is our contract, and we all stick to it, right? Contracts for computers need to be written in a way that computers can easily understand them, and this is why we have schema languages or data modeling languages. It's the same thing. And Yang is one such language. SNMP is another one thing you might have on your devices. MIBs are also data models, and they're written in another schema language called SMI version 2. That's not very nice to read, and I think this is actually one of the factors behind Yang's sort of success, because it is quite successful. A lot of people are using it, not just in the IETF, which is the standardization body that standardizes Yang, but in other standardization bodies as well. Yang is easy to read, so it's easy to work with. We are humans, after all, that are writing these contracts. Okay. Here's a very trivial Yang model. I don't mean to teach Yang here, really, but let's take an example. So it has a container, it's called internet, in that there's a list called cat. Every cat is going to have a name, and the name is also the key of the list. Yang was purpose-written for NetConf. So and that is sort of interesting, actually, because there are lots of schema languages out there. If you read computer science courses, you've probably seen different schema languages. What is interesting is that it's purpose-written for this, the purpose of network automation, essentially network management, which means that it has certain concepts you don't find in other schema languages. It understands the notion of what is configuration and what is state. This is something you don't have in XML schema definition. And I think it makes it uniquely suitable for the purpose of network automation. And I'd even go as far to say that it makes it very good for automation overall, not just specific to networks. I want to complete my example, right? So we had the model. I now put the model up to the left, and down here is an example of instance data, configuration, how it could look like, right? So we have that internet. I'm going to try. Oh, yeah, there we go. The internet container, and then we have 2 list entries. This is the first one. It's a cat. His name is Jingles. And then the second one, and that name is Fluffy. This is valid data. It will validate against this model. If you add something else, it won't be valid, right? And then you can throw it away. So I faced argumentation along the lines of, we don't need Yang models. They're too complicated, too high overhead in writing these things. They bring nothing to the table. Why does the networking world need to be so damn different from everything else? I mean, we've already solved this with, in the server world, we're doing something else, right? If you use Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Salt, whatever, something like this, you don't have models. You just you have a bash shell, more or less, that you interact with. You send some commands, you send other commands, you collect some output, right? Isn't that the better approach, I'm asked? It's quicker typically. You can just run some commands, right? Now, Bash also has syntax, of course. So, I mean, you could talk about, would it be possible to write a data model for this? But the syntax of Bash is very expressive, and then you're running commands in this, and those commands in turn have some syntax for their input, and trying to model all of this is close to impossible. So it is very, very difficult. But then the question is, do we actually need a model? Or do we just want our network devices to look more like servers, so we can manage them like servers? Some say yes. I say no. There's any design choices. You have pros and cons. You're going to select the things, the properties that you want from your system, right? And it can be somewhat difficult actually to judge which is the better approach. I think one way of looking at this is looking at the organization that you have, the different systems that you have, and how they communicate. You have communication boundaries and communication paths. So we're going to take some examples here. We have the team 1 here, is the blue thing on top. They are responsible for a management system, and they have devices. Now, they are not only responsible for these, they are also in total control because they develop these things. They develop their own devices, and they develop the management system to run them, right? Maybe the code for the devices and the management system are actually in the same Git repository, which means they're very tightly coupled. If you change one, you can easily change the other. So in this case, in this type of environment, you might not actually, I mean, it's very easy for you through sort of version control to control the whole process and make sure that things actually work, right? If we instead switch to the pink team down here, or team 2, they too have a management system, which they're responsible for, and they control it because they're doing the development of it. However, these devices, they are responsible for them, but they don't control them. They buy these from Cisco or some other large vendor, right? Maybe they can choose when to upgrade software on them, but ultimately they are not in direct control over those devices. They can't control what the interface looks like. So in this case, I think it might make sense to have a contract. Just like you have a contract with your vendor that specifies what is the price of this piece of equipment, it also makes sense to have a contract that specifies these are the things that this system will send to you, and these are the things that you're allowed to send to the system, right? Poor team 3 over here, they don't have a management system at all, they just produce devices. But they are developing devices. And those devices are apparently managed by the management system of team 1 here. So even though all of this is within the same company, you have different teams. And then I think it might make sense to have this sort of contract again. You just sit down, I mean, it's the other team, you have a meeting, you sit down and you talk about what is the expected data that you're going to send to me and what am I going to send to you, and then you write that down in some way. That is a YAG model. We have the last line here, right? I drew these in different colors, so the green one here is one where you might not be using YAG models because you control the whole thing, right? Whereas the purple ones are the ones you want YAG models for describing those interfaces. Now, this team here and this team, their management systems talk together. I mean, maybe this is the server team, right? And this is the network team down here. So their systems are going to communicate with each other. And that's another example of when I think it does make sense to have this sort of contract in place that says these are the things. I mean, if this is the network team, right, what services does the network provide? Oh yeah, we have internet services, we have VPN, we have something else, right? Then you express that in a YAG model. That's what it's about. So some say it's slow defining these YAG models and stuff. Personally, I actually like it. I think it's faster doing development when you have these models. So I like to put them everywhere. I mean, it's sort of, you put down your design, a lot of it actually revolves around data, and putting it in a YAG model allows you to build a sort of a mental model and something to reason about with other people in the organization. But if you don't want it, I mean, if you have high alignment within a team, you might not need it. Otherwise, you probably should have it. Okay. So, model-driven is something. Not sure I mentioned model-driven here before, but it's almost one of those hype terms these days. You might not know what it actually means, but it's really it's basic for me, right? It's you have operational sort of development and operational processes that are centered on the data model. When we write programs, a lot of it consists of just reading some data, validating that data, having it in some internal format, and then processing it, doing something else with it, right? All that reading of data and validating it, can't we, I mean, this is a repeating task. Every program does this all the time. Can't we just get rid of that? Yeah, that's what model-driven is about. We define a Yang model that specifies the interface, and then we can actually render the code to do all of this reading of input and doing the validation. We can also use it to render interfaces. So this is like if you want an API, a RESTconf API or a NetConf API, you just write the model and then you render the interfaces. You don't need to write so much code because you can just generate the code, right? So we drastically reduce this otherwise repeating code pattern, right? Who in here has programmed, scripted, written something? Hands. Oh, quite a lot. Good. Yang isn't limited to these networking interfaces. It's not just netconf and restconf, right? If you have a configuration file or some input to a program that you're running locally, you've probably written lots of validation. You have if conditions, is this input given, then this other one is not allowed to be given, and blah, 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 blah. You can just convey this through a Yang model or some form of model. Yang is sort of networking world-centric, right? There are other, who many knows what Swagger is, or Open API? Because I think that's the same thing. Some hands. That is really the same thing, and I think it's gotten a better foothold in a large part of the programming world, probably. But it's really about the same thing. You're writing a schema for the input that your program can take. And I think this is it's a good development. Overall, in the industry, actually, we are set to advance in this direction, I think. A lot of programming languages are also more about cool type systems where you have static validation, strong typing, and static typing. So it's really, which is really just the same thing. I mean, in one context, it's programming languages. In another context like this, it's more about data, right? So I think you can pretty much, Yang, you can apply Yang for everything. And I think we should apply it much more broadly than we do today. Anyone hungry yet? So we're just getting to the interesting stuff. Quiz time. So this is Python, right? Can anyone tell me, is this valid syntax or not? Is it? No. Okay, so I think if you do have the most basic definition of what is a syntax check, then this is actually valid syntax. But semantics, if you try to apply semantics or something called context, well, if you don't have context-free grammar, context-sensitive grammar, then this would fail. Just like you said, the B is not defined, right? You'd get an error. This is the error that you get. B is not defined. I've updated the program. I've added a sleep before we try to print. How long will it take before this program throws an error? More than 10 seconds or less than a second? Sort of immediately. You say immediately. Just over 10 seconds. Due to the way that Python interprets this, it's not going to get to that line until the sleep is over. So it takes just over 10 seconds for you get the error. If you write a larger program, I mean, you're not going to get to the faulty code, your bug, until until the program actually gets there, right? It has to go through a number of conditions, and then finally you're going to get there. For writing robust and safe systems, we want to be able to catch this type of error up front, right? I mean, we don't even want to test this in CI. You shouldn't be able to commit this. It should be like right away. You shouldn't be able to commit it because it's broken. PyLint to the rescue. So it had a number of things to complain about here. You shouldn't name your programs foo. and blah, 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 blah. But the interesting one is the last one, which is this, E, so it's an error, right? Undefined variable, blah, 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 blah. So if you do pylint, using something like that, this is a type of static validation, right? If you use pylint, then you save yourself from headaches that you're gonna notice long down the line, right? I mean, this is the problem with programs. All these conditions that we have large code, right? Can we actually test all of it, all the different error cases? It's really difficult. And if we want to write robust systems, we sort of need to, right? We want to have guarantees that things work. Let's complicate things. Can anyone spot the bug? Obviously not. So just the amount of code here makes it a little bit more subtle, but it is actually technically the same error as the previous example. It's here, polarization dependent, that should be an E there. So we have an incorrectly spelled thing, right? But this is not further complicated, but this object is coming from the network. It's a network API. We talked to the device, and then we were getting that that data from over there, which makes it much trickier to validate. So as we have seen, communication between systems is necessary, and the type of static validation we can apply to code is very useful for writing robust systems. But typically, we completely lose that type of validation when we communicate between systems over a network. Unless, of course, that communication over that interface is somehow defined, right? That's what Yang is for. Then we can use that definition, that data model, to generate code, which in turn we can statically validate. And thus we can find problems like this. So all of this is a form of static validation. I think this is, static validation is an important part of building robust and safe systems. So going back to this example, can anyone tell me what type of exceptions could be thrown by this program? Anyone? Nope. Neither can I. It is not possible to know in Python due to its dynamic nature. You simply can't know what the type of exceptions can be thrown by this code. What usually happens, I call it the happy path coding, right? You write for the happy case when everything is working. That's how you start out. You commit this code, and then a week later you put it in production, and you notice something failing, and then you add in some exception handling. 4 weeks down the line, you find another exception, you add in handling. 4 years down the line, you add another exception handling. That's how we evolve our code, and then 10 years down the line, or 5, I don't know, you want to refactor, and you're like, all these no, that's not possible. Let's remove that, right? And then you start over. We have a similar situation with networks. I talked some about code, right? And why am I talking about code? Because we're here about trying to build networks. So I think we have a similar situation with our networks. A lot of the event output that you get from your network is not very structured at all. You have syslog. What type of syslog messages can you receive from your devices? Does anyone have a comprehensive list of all the types of syslog messages you can receive from your devices? Probably not. It also changes with software versions and so on and so forth, right? So that weird temperature alarm, for example, or temperature text message in a syslog message is something that you're just not going to see until your data center is on fire, and then it's a little too late. So if we want to build a robust system, we have to know about these things, right? We have to guarantee that we can actually handle all the different scenarios that you might have. So that's what I'm going to talk about, one of the models very, very quickly here. There's an IETF draft currently for alarms, defining alarms. It sets the sort of basic frameworks around this. And one of the very cool things at the alarm type of something, which could be like a temperature alarm or a power alarm, is a Yang identities. Now, devices that speak netconf, they announce their capabilities. So we have a list of all the modules, Yang models, that they support. So we can figure out the full list of all the alarms that a device is able to raise to us. We can statically validate that our management system code is able to handle all the different exceptions, right? Because it's defined in the interface. Now, another cool thing about these is that the alarm types are Yang identities, and Yang identities have inheritance. Thus, we get alarm identifier inheritance. This makes me very happy. So what does that mean? That means you can sort of group things together. You can have this is just like classes, subclasses in a programming language, right? I mean, you have a class and then you inherit that one, right? So the cool thing that you can do now with these identities is that you can check which one did we inherit from. We actually have multi-inheritance here too, so we can have sort of like parallel trees. What's nice about this is that if you say site-related stuff, like power and temperature, I don't want that, I don't care about that, because my world is digital, I just care about zeros and stuff. So I want to send that to the site guys. Those are the ones that actually fix power in the data center, and they fix, things like that, right? You can do that, because if all these environmental alarms, say, inherit from one alarm type, an abstract and environmental alarm type, then you can easily select all of those and sort of direct those alarms to the site guys. And similarly for something else, it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you select things. And again, by having this comprehensive list of all the alarms that a device can actually raise, we can statically validate and make sure we can prove and guarantee that our system is able to handle it all. And I think that is very important in building robust automation systems. So finally, I don't know if I'm sounding too negative or pessimistic or not, but I want to finish on a positive note. So Kent Beck, your other experienced developer, wrote this not so long ago. So if there's one lesson I would like the next generation of developers to learn, it is to spend less time doing hard things and more time making hard things easy. So I fully agree with Kent. But I also think that we're in a much better position today than we were 10 or 20 years ago. It is easier to build robust systems today, but we must also be careful and deliberate in the design of our systems to sort of fulfill the responsibilities that we have towards customers and ultimately society. Thank you.
We have some time for a couple of quick questions for Kristian, if anyone has one.
Finish early. Lunch.
Or is it lunchtime? Okay, well, please join me in thanking Kristian.
Thank you.
So yes, that's the end of the first session of the day. We'll break early, lunch should be ready, and we'll see you back here at 1:30. Thank you very much.